Making a mess, making a mess. Kiln washing my shelves and making a mess.
Everything about you. Everything about you.
Hello you dirty potters, how are you today? Today we're going to talk about kiln wash. Kiln wash is a substance that you put on your shelves after you're done cleaning them to form a protective layer to make sure that those pots don't stick on your shelves again. And this stuff's actually extremely easy to use, but before you use this on your shelves, you do have to clean your shelves off. So today, not only are we going to go over kiln wash and how to get some for yourself, but we're also going to go over the way that I clean my kiln shelves. At some point in your life, especially if you own your own kiln, you're going to have glaze drip on your kiln shelf, and sadly enough, you're going to have stuff stick just like this. This is a very common reoccurrence with most potters, especially if you've been doing ceramic artwork for quite some time. You see this stuff right here? This is glaze. And not only has it dripped onto my kiln shelf is a little bit porous, kind of like some ceramic artwork. And because of that, this stuff is fused on there. You're not taking it off all that easy. It's going to take a little bit of time and elbow grease to get this stuff off. But the worst part is, after you get it off, it creates these giant potholes just like this. And this kiln wash is going to fill these potholes in a little bit, as well as make a nice protective layer just like the original substance on your kiln shelves. Now, I bought my kiln wash from Amico, but there's a bunch of ceramic recipes for it on Digital Fire and on glazy.org, so you can make it yourself or you can buy it from a store. But please don't think you can just start chipping away with your fingernails and your hands and this stuff will come right off. There's some hardcore equipment we're going to need to get this stuff off of our kiln shelves before we get this started. Number 1 and 1.5, you are definitely going to need yourself some kiln wash, whether it be a recipe or you store-bought it. Number 1.5, you are going to need a container. Now, I like to use this kind of container because at some point we're going to need a brush and we're going to have to fit this brush inside the container to dip it and wash it on our shelves. Please do not think this is an acceptable container because number 1, your brush will not fit in there, and number 2, if you do have a brush that fits in there, you're going to be painting your shelves forever and ever and ever with this tiny little brush. Don't do this to yourself. Some of us have work to do today. Number 2, you are going to need a brush. Now, don't get you an expensive brush, get you a nice little cheap brush from Home Depot. Number 3, make sure you get yourself a good hammer. 4, not completely necessary, but I prefer to have some sort of chisel. Number 5, you are going to need a rub brick. Yes, that is its real name, do not question it. Number 6, you are going to need a tiny bit of protective gear, namely a pair of good quality gloves and some eyewear. The reason you need these gloves is because glaze is still technically a glass-like material. Even when it's already fired and fused to your kiln shelf, it can still open you up and cut you. So please be careful and wear a pair of gloves. And the eyewear is so that when you chip this stuff off, it doesn't fly off the shelf and go into one of your eyes and you become all Harry Potter, mad-eyed, moody for the rest of the day. I know that this is a lot of stuff, but you can actually get all of this at one trip to Home Depot, aside from the kiln wash. Let's start off with chipping that glaze off the shelf. So let's put our kiln wash stuff to the side, and let's just work with the tools we need for now. When you first start this process, go ahead and start using your rub brick first. This will get a lot of the larger chunks of glaze off your kiln shelf, so that way you don't have to chip off every single piece. It essentially cuts the work in half. You see, now I only have to chip off those 2 little pieces right there instead of doing work on that entire area with a chisel and hammer. Now I can just do that 1 or 2 little spots. After you're done scrubbing all your kiln shelves off with this rub brick here, you're going to start to realize that there's some stuff that's really stuck on there, a little bit too small to actually rub off with this rub brick here. See, this stuff doesn't really come off, and that's when you got to get yourself the hammer and chisel we were talking about earlier. Now, if you're new to the way a chisel works, your first reaction is probably going to be to put this pointy part down and go ahead and hit the top as hard as you can. But hold on there, Tiger, that's not the way you really use a chisel. You see, even though you really can't see it all that well, there's still a layer right above your kiln shelf right here. And your job is to kind of get underneath it with your chisel, like a little nail bed, and just pop that sucker out. And if you chip a little bit of kiln shelf out along the way, that's actually fine, because we're going to put kiln wash over that layer anyway, and it'll produce a nice little layer where that layer was missing. Super zoomed in potter tip. If you ever have a big line of glaze just like this, instead of chipping away at it at a vertical angle, go ahead and put it at a horizontal angle. This way, as long as you put it right against the glaze body, you can get giant chunks at a time. After you're done getting the majority of the glaze off your kiln shelves, go ahead and rub it down one more time with that rub brick, just to make sure. When you're all done chiseling and rubbing and scrubbing, go ahead and get a little brush and dust off the top layer of whatever you're working on. There's a lot of extra dust that comes off of these kiln shelves because the extra material that was on there basically just got rubbed and chipped off. So make sure they're nice and clean. Now that we've done all the chipping and scraping, it's time to make the mixture of our kiln wash. Go ahead and open up your package or mixture of kiln wash. And everyone always asks me for a measurement of kiln wash, but what I do is I usually fill it up about halfway of this container. Then I'll add a good amount of water to it, but make sure not to oversaturate it. Then I'll get my brush and just go ahead and whisk it around a good amount. Potter tip: don't add too much water. It's kind of like making glaze. I would much rather you add less water so you can add more water immediately than wait for nature to take its course and it go ahead and dehydrate itself. This way you can control how thick it is immediately instead of waiting for this process to happen naturally with evaporation. See, and there you go, nice and mixed. I've always been told to make it the consistency of milk, and that's always seemed to work out for me, but some people like it a little bit thicker. You see, and now we have this really nice kiln wash in here, and this is going to be the container that we hold our kiln wash in until we're done with the end of this project. You guys remember those kiln shelves you went ham sandwich on earlier with the rub stone and the chisel? Go ahead, get your paintbrush, and just start putting layers upon layers of this kiln wash on there, but make sure to only do one layer at a time because we're going to do in between 2 to 3 layers. I'm going to do a layer in this direction. After you're done putting your first layer on, go ahead, let it dry. It should be fairly quick. It only takes about 2 to 3 minutes. And once it's dry, go ahead and get your kiln wash and make a layer in the opposite direction in which you just made the first layer. Now we're just going to pick this up very gently and let this dry somewhere. And look at these now. These are a far cry from what we first started with. Cleaning your kiln shelves isn't actually a very hard process. The only problem is you really need to have experience in chipping that glaze off of your shelves. And after that, it's just a matter of simple painting and glazing like a normal piece of pottery. Now all we really have to do is let these air dry and they'll be good for use for the next kiln load. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I know it seems kind of like a lot of stuff to do, but after you get the proper equipment to just chip off that glaze from your kiln shelves, it's really all about getting the consistency of your kiln wash right and putting those necessary layers on there, maybe 1 to 2 coats. But thank you guys again for joining me today. If you'd like to see any of my artwork, the links are always down below for your beautiful potter eyes to see. I really hope this helps some of you guys out do your kiln shelves for the very first time and make sure that they don't stick to your pottery. That way you don't ruin any of your beautiful artwork. And I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week.
"お前は死んでる?何?"